The child inside you has never stopped waiting. Though you may have buried him beneath layers of achievement, roles, and masks you have worn to meet the world. Though you may have silenced her cries with duties and obligations and the ceaseless murmur of modern life that praises speed and productivity above silence and reverie. Though you may have convinced yourself that you are wholly adult, wholly rational, wholly mature, still there is within you a figure that has never ceased to exist, an ancient and eternal archetype clothed in the fragile garments of memory, and this figure, the inner child, is both wound and seed, both shadow and light, both memory and possibility, calling to you in dreams, in sudden laughter, in tears you cannot explain, in longings that pierce the heart when you hear the echo of a song or see the innocence in another's eyes, reminding you that the story of your soul is not finished until you acknowledge the one who waits. For to deny the child is to sever yourself from the fountain of imagination, spontaneity, and authenticity, and to embrace him is to open the path of individuation, the process by which the psyche moves toward wholeness, balancing conscious persona with unconscious depth, integrating shadow with spirit, acknowledging both the wounded and the divine within. This child has been with you since the beginning, and though you may think of him as something belonging to the past, a relic of your early years, in truth he is timeless, an eternal presence who carries the essence of your uniqueness, the spark of play that cannot be reduced to function or utility, the voice that whispers even in adulthood that you were made not merely to adapt but to live, not merely to conform but to become. And if you listen closely, you may hear his voice in moments when your outer life feels barren, when no accomplishment can quench the thirst within, when success tastes of ashes and praise feels hollow, for it is then that the child within rises and says, I am still here, I have waited for you, I have not given up, though you have forgotten me. And until you turn to me, I will remain hidden in the recesses of your soul, appearing only in fragments, in dreams and symbols, in sudden bursts of joy or eruptions of despair. And when I say the child waits, I do not mean merely the personal child, the memories of your own biography, though those are powerful and charged with feeling, but also the archetypal child, the figure that appears across cultures and myths as the bearer of renewal, the sacred infant who promises rebirth, the divine child whose vulnerability conceals an unbreakable strength, the trickster child who disrupts the rigid order of the adult world to bring new creation. For the psyche knows that every renewal of life requires a return to origins, a rencounter with beginnings, a confrontation with innocence and possibility, and so within you this archetypal child is never extinguished, never erased by time, but waits for your attention, waits for your embrace, waits for your courage to descend into the depths of yourself where he dwells. And yet most men and women are afraid of this descent, for to turn toward the child is also to turn toward pain, toward wounds inflicted when innocence met rejection, when spontaneity was punished, when love was not reciprocated, when laughter was silenced, and so many prefer to wear the armor of adulthood, to cover vulnerability with cynicism, to replace curiosity with certainty, to hide longing behind achievement. And yet the unconscious does not forget. The unconscious holds all that was repressed. And the child, though hidden, continues to breathe, continues to call, continues to press upon consciousness until he is acknowledged, until she is allowed to speak her truth. Therefore, when I say the child has never stopped waiting, I mean that your own wholeness has never stopped waiting. For in the child lives the secret of your creativity, your capacity for wonder, your ability to love without calculation, your openness to mystery, your willingness to believe that the world is larger than the structures you have inherited. In my work I have seen that dreams often present the child, sometimes wounded, sometimes radiant, sometimes abandoned, sometimes crowned with light. And each time it is the psyche's attempt to bring the adult ego back into relationship with what has been forgotten, to remind the conscious mind that no matter how many masks it wears, it cannot escape the truth of its origins. And I have also seen that those who refuse to acknowledge this figure suffer a peculiar emptiness, a sterility of soul, a restlessness that no external achievement can satisfy. For the child is the fountain of meaning, and without him life becomes mechanical, devoid of imagination, a treadmill of duties performed without joy. But those who dare to embrace the child, to listen to his stories, to feel her wounds, to play again, to imagine again, to weep as well as laugh, those discover a source of renewal, a connection to the self, the totality of the psyche, which is the goal of individuation. For the child within is not merely a memory, but a living archetype, a guide who leads you back to wholeness, who teaches you that your adult identity is not the end, but only a stage in a larger journey, that you are called to integrate past and present, conscious and unconscious, innocence and experience. And in this integration lies your healing, your strength, your capacity to live authentically. So I urge you, do not silence the voice that rises from within. Do not dismiss the dreams that place you once again in the landscapes of childhood. Do not laugh away the tears that come when you remember the lost simplicity of youth, for these are not weaknesses, but signals, messages from the depths of your own soul, reminding you that the child waits. Always waits, waits with patience beyond time, waits with hope that you will finally return. And when you do, you will discover that what you thought was fragile is in truth eternal. What you thought was weakness is strength. What you thought was past is still present. And what you thought was lost has only been hidden, waiting for the day when you would finally remember that to be whole is to be both child and adult, both vulnerable and strong, both dreamer and doer, both wounded and healed. For the opposites meet in the self, and the self is never complete until the child is welcomed home. The child inside you, who has never ceased waiting, now becomes in our second movement not only a whisper of memory or a fragile shadow of the past, but a living presence, a constant, archetypal companion who embodies both the wound and the promise of renewal. And here we must descend deeper. For if in the first part we acknowledged his existence, in this part we must grapple with his voice, his demands, his persistence that no mask, no persona, no adaptation to the world can silence. For the child belongs to the eternal drama of the psyche, and wherever we turn he reveals himself, whether through the sudden rebellion of emotions we thought tamed, through the overwhelming longing for love that no partner or possession can fully satisfy, or through the seemingly irrational sadness that overtakes us in moments of quiet when our defenses are lowered, and we realize that beneath all the accomplishments of adulthood something essential has remained unaddressed. The child within demands not only recognition but integration, and this integration requires courage. For to approach the child is to open the box of forgotten sorrows, to revisit the valleys where innocence was betrayed, to feel once again the tremors of rejection, the sting of abandonment, the chill of loneliness. And yet the paradox is this: only by facing these dark waters can we drink from the fountain of renewal, only by embracing the very wounds we sought. To escape can we find the healing we secretly crave, for the psyche is whole only when the opposites are held together. And the child is the symbol of this wholeness, innocence and wisdom, weakness and power, wound and healing, despair and hope within a single figure who resists all simplification. And here myth and dream, scripture and legend all speak in unison, for across cultures we find the archetype of the divine child, sometimes abandoned in a river yet destined for greatness, sometimes hidden from tyrants who seek his destruction, sometimes found in a manger while kings bow before him, sometimes appearing as a mischievous trickster whose laughter breaks the rigidity of the old order. But always this child signifies the possibility of rebirth, the eruption of new life into the stagnation of what has become too rigid, too cold, too dead. And so it is within you, that the inner child who waits is not merely your biographical remnant, but the universal sign of life's refusal to die, of the unconscious insisting upon renewal, of the self-demanding that you do not reduce yourself to a machine of adaptation, but remember your calling to become whole. And when you dream of being small again, of wandering through houses of childhood, of playing with toys long gone, of crying out for a parent who never comes, these are not merely nostalgic fragments, but the language of your soul calling you to turn toward that which you abandoned, to bring into consciousness what has remained in shadow. For the child is the shadow of the adult, but also the light of the future. And to ignore him is to live divided, fractured, restless, but to embrace him is to risk transformation. And transformation always carries the danger of dissolution, because the ego fears that if it allows the child to speak, it will lose its control, its carefully constructed order, its protective armor. And yet only in that surrender is true strength born, for when the adult bows before the child, when reason listens to feeling, when control allows spontaneity, then a new harmony emerges. Not regression, but integration, not weakness, but depth. Consider how many in our age suffer from a hunger they cannot name, filling their days with endless distractions, their homes with objects, their schedules with tasks, yet lying awake in the night, haunted by a sense of emptiness. And this emptiness is nothing other than the absence of the child, the refusal to listen to the inner voice that longs for play, for wonder, for connection, for love without condition. And our culture, obsessed with efficiency and success, ridicules the child, silences his voice, dismisses her tears, but the unconscious rebels it does not forget. It sends symptoms, depressions, anxieties, compulsions, as if to say, you have betrayed yourself, you have abandoned your child, and until you return no peace will come. And so the path of individuation is inseparable from the path toward the child, for in the figure of the child the self beckons, demanding that the ego journey downward before it can ascend, that it reclaim the roots before it can stretch toward the heavens, that it becomes simple before it can be wise, that it become vulnerable before it can be strong. And thus in therapy, again and again, I have witnessed how healing begins when a man dares to weep for the boy he once was, when a woman allows herself to hold the little girl who trembled in silence, when dreams return them to scenes long forgotten, and instead of turning away they stay, they feel, they listen, and something miraculous happens. The abandoned one is no longer abandoned. The rejected one is no longer rejected, and in that embrace the adult self becomes larger, more whole, more human, for wholeness is not perfection, but the holding together of all that we are. And the child is central to this holding. So let us not think of him as weak or powerless, for in truth he is the carrier of new life, the guardian of creativity, the seed of transformation. And his waiting is not passive but active, a steady pressure from the depths, a force that will not allow the adult ego to rest until it turns inward and downward and acknowledges what it has long forgotten. And if you wonder why your soul aches though you have all you thought you wanted, if you wonder why joy slips through your fingers though you have chased every promise of the world, if you wonder why you feel alone even among crowds, listen. It is because the child still waits in the hidden chambers of your soul, waits in your dreams and in your longing, waits in your laughter and in your sorrow, waits for you to take his hand, to let her speak, to welcome him home. For only then will you discover that you were never truly alone, that within you dwells the source of renewal, that the one you abandoned has never abandoned you, that the child inside has always kept vigil, hoping, waiting, believing that one day you would remember that to live is not merely to survive, not merely to adapt, but to become whole, to embrace all that you are, to hold within yourself the mystery of beginnings and the promise of renewal. And this is why I say again, the child inside you has never stopped waiting. The child inside you, who in the first moment of our reflection was acknowledged as waiting, and in the second was revealed as the archetypal guide toward renewal, now, in this third and final meditation, emerges not only as presence, but as destiny. For if the soul is a journey and individuation is its path, then the figure of the child is the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega of our becoming, and here we must linger even more deeply, expanding our gaze to take in the full expanse of the mystery. For the child is not merely a fragment of the psyche, but the very key to the mystery of life's meaning, the symbol through which the self announces itself as both source and telos, as that which always was and always shall be, and thus the waiting of the child is not passive, but eternal, not accidental, but essential, because the child waits as eternity waits, as the unconscious waits, as God waits, as the depths of being wait for consciousness to awaken and unite what has been sundered. And if you would understand this, you must consider the nature of time itself, for the child lives beyond linear time, beyond the clock that governs the adult world, beyond the calendar and the schedule, for the child is always now, always present, always immediate. And this immediacy is what adulthood has forgotten, buried beneath layers of abstraction and concern for the future or nostalgia for the past. Yet the child knows that life is only ever here, in this breath, in this play, in this laughter, in this tear. And so to meet the child again is to step outside the prison of linearity and re-enter the eternal now, where the self abides. And here we must see that all spiritual traditions, whether they know it or not, bow before the child, for to become like children, to recover innocence, to embrace simplicity, to allow wonder, these are the gates to the kingdom of the soul. And so when the inner child calls you, he is not distracting you from maturity, but leading you into a maturity beyond the ego, a wisdom that is childlike but not childish, a depth that appears as simplicity, a strength that appears as weakness. For paradox is the law of the archetype, and the child is paradox embodied. But how easily we betray him still, how easily we cast him aside as impractical, how easily we silence her voice with the noise of ambition, how quickly we dismiss the play of imagination as frivolous, and yet in doing so we betray not only the child but ourselves, for without the child we become machines, shadows of humanity, competent yet lifeless, efficient yet barren, successful yet hollow. And this is why so many, even in the height of worldly triumph, confess to an emptiness they cannot name, for they have lost the child, and with him they have lost the key to joy. And so I tell you now, the child does not merely wait for recognition, but for a covenant, a promise, a commitment from you that you will not abandon him again. that you will not silence her when the world laughs, that you will not reduce him to a memory, but honor him as living presence, as the voice of the self, as the root of your being. And when you make this covenant, you will feel the trembling of the soul as though a long exile has ended. You will sense a reunion that words cannot fully capture, as though you had returned to the first home you ever knew, for in truth you have. And this home is not a house of stone or wood, but the inner chamber of your own soul, where the child dwells, waiting, waiting, waiting. And I say again, his waiting is not weakness, but power, for only the eternal can wait without despair. Only that which is infinite can endure without losing hope. And so the child's waiting is the sign that within you there is something indestructible, something beyond the reach of time and suffering, something that has never been touched by corruption, something that remains whole even when the outer life is shattered, and this something is the self, clothed in the image of the child, reminding you that no matter how far you wander, no matter how deep your wounds, no matter how heavy your despair, there is within you a core that remains pure, untouched, whole, waiting to be rediscovered, waiting to be embraced, waiting to become the seed of new life. And thus, my friends, the task before you is not merely psychological but spiritual, not merely therapeutic but sacred, for in embracing the child you embrace the eternal. In holding the child you hold the infinite. In loving the child you love the divine spark within yourself, and without this you will never be whole. But with it even your wounds will shine with meaning. Even your failures will become part of the greater pattern. Even your suffering will be woven into the fabric of transformation. For the self wastes nothing, and the child teaches that even in weakness there is strength, even in loss there is renewal, even in endings there are beginnings. And so you must listen, you must turn inward, you must walk the difficult path of individuation that leads not away from the child but back to him, not toward escape but toward embrace, not toward forgetting but toward remembering, until you realize that the child who waited was never other than your own true self, waiting for you to awaken, waiting for you to come home, waiting for you to become whole at last. The child inside you, who in this long unfolding vision has revealed himself as the guardian of both memory and destiny, still speaks even as we move toward the close, for he insists that his story cannot be ended with a neat conclusion. He insists that his waiting is not a chapter that can be shut, but an eternal summons to remain open, to remain alive, to remain whole. And thus, if there is yet more to be spoken, it is because the child is inexhaustible. He is not finished with you, he is not finished with me, he is not finished with humanity, for as long as there are men and women who forget the source of their joy, who bury their play beneath duty, who harden their hearts against their own tenderness, the child will wait and speak and dream, and his dreams will enter our night to disturb us, to remind us the machinery of survival. And so even when you resist him, he appears, perhaps in the sudden tears that come unbidden when you see a child at play, perhaps in the quiet sorrow that washes over you when you hear a song from your youth, perhaps in the strange yearning that strikes when you walk through a place you once knew and realize that something inside you is still standing there, still waiting, still longing, still alive. And in those moments the veil thins and you glimpse the truth, that the child you thought you had outgrown